Hey, gang. Welcome back. Eric Whitacre here, and thrilled to have a conversation this morning with absolute legend and a friend, John Powell. I know a lot of you are super fans of John's, and I was a super fan even before I met John. My wife, Laurence, can sing, I mean, half the scores, but How to Train Your Dragon 2 from start to finish, every note. He's an extraordinary composer, an extraordinary storyteller, and just a brilliant mind. And he's pretty funny. So let's just jump right in and welcome to the live stream, Maestro John Powell. Let's see. John, can you hear me?
Yeah, hello. I heard that ridiculous intro.
Yeah. Well, it could have been worse. Yeah, it was funny because last night I was going through just looking at your filmography and stunned by the number of scores that I know that I was knocked out by, some things that I didn't even know you'd written. And I mean, it's
really.
Yes, exactly. It's just an extraordinary body of work. And I thought maybe this morning what we could do is start, and if you wouldn't mind, let's just start at the beginning of what we're going to talk, by the way, not only about your film music, but about your concert works, of which I'm also a huge fan. But let's start with film music. And can you just talk about it from a nuts and bolts perspective, how the whole thing starts, the process? Or is there a process? Do you know, is every film different?
There's a process. There's nuts and bolts that perhaps could be applied for any film, and then that people should do, and then there's the nuts and bolts I have. My nuts and bolts are more like screws and broken and lots of types of glue. Yeah, it's a general sort of hardware store of probably inappropriate tools, which I normally take with too much enthusiasm to the things, and then eventually end up with something that should work in theory. But well, I mean, it's, I don't know, what's the tool? The nuts and bolts are, if you can figure out how to make music, write music, create music, and then you react to a story, you try and figure out what music that you can make, how that could support the story.
Okay, so let me stop you right there. So for instance, starting with a story. So do you start with a script? Do they first send you a script? Is the first time you know anything about the movie the rough cut? Where in the process do you usually begin your writing process?
Sorry, we just got spam call on the laptop, so I don't know if I've disappeared. I'm still here.
You're still there, and I didn't hear any
okay,
spam. So
okay, great.
You're safe.
Yeah, sometimes you get a script. I've sometimes been able to sort of figure things out from scripts, but very rarely, to tell you the truth. I really don't know what the film is until I see it. With animation, you get a film very early on, but it's often just still images. It's storyboards which are being cut together, which is actually one of the reasons I like animation, and I think animation storytelling is very effective, is that they spend a lot of time watching the story, even though it's not finished. Even each shot isn't finished, and gradually over the period of the filmmaking, each shot goes from still to moving somewhat, to moving a bit better, to colored, to perfect. But you get a picture of the film as it's going to come much early on, really, than with live action, which either just sort of dumps suddenly on you, and then they keep cutting it, keep moving everything around, or a script which can tell you what everyone's going to say and what the story is, but it never tells you the tone, and it never tells you really the energy that's going to be in the filmmaking. So I don't really know what I'm doing until about 2 weeks before the end. So I might start at 12 weeks before the end.
So the whole thing, like you might write your first note of music 12
Yeah.
weeks before and when you say the end, that's like after the recording, even when you're completely signed
After
off.
the recording, just before the dub, perhaps. So the dub is when they finally take all of the music, all the sound effects, and the cleaned up dialogue or whatever, and they do the sound mix of all of the elements into the final thing. And that's the point at which really the film finally comes together. Visual effects often aren't finished till then. Sometimes they're not even finished then. Animation isn't really finished till then. So you're working on a film that's still being completed. I'd say out of 60 films, I've only ever done one which was completed before I started. Everything else is completed either as I'm working, or even sometimes after I'm working on it. So sometimes it's really being finished on the dub. I mean, I've worked on films where I really didn't know what they looked like until I went to the premiere.
It's unreal. And then also just the idea that you start, I imagine 12 weeks is a relatively large amount of time in your world, that sometimes it's even less than 12 weeks from the time that you start writing to the time. And most of these movies that you do have like 2 hours of orchestral music. And
yeah, I mean, animation generally they try and keep the films to 90 minutes, so you end up with about 85 minutes of music. Live action, it tends to be a bit longer. You end up, well, it depends. I mean, there was a tradition in the 30s, 40s, 50s of wall-to-wall music, and then in the 50s and 60s and 70s that went away. I always say that one of my favorite films scores is to Dog Day Afternoon. And I make
is there anything in it?
No, there's no music.
No score.
No score at all. I put my favorite composer, Cy Lentz, Cy Lentz, like some Jewish composer from Brooklyn or something.
Right.
But that's just a style in a way. And then in the 80s it started coming back, and by the 90s every action film had more music in it than film. And so it depends on what kind of the style of things is. Bourne Identity, one of the things I did in that was to not have as much music. So we brought it down to about 54 minutes of music in a 98-minute film, maybe a 104-minute film. So
and not to interrupt, but so that's a conversation that's obviously happening with the director, right? In a really intimate way, where it's like, okay, this scene needs music, doesn't, and you're also lobbying, saying, I actually think this kind of needs this thing. I'm to help tell the story. It's a partnership, right? As you're making it.
Oh, very much so. Yes, really. The director, the editor, very important. They really are putting everything together as everybody is making it. They come on before me, and they're very often sort of taking the things that are shot that day and starting to construct the film as it's being filmed, or as it's being made. Animation editors are on it for 2 years, while and they're the people who are putting the storyboards together. And then as the storyboard for one scene changes to a rough animation, they'll swap that out, and they'll work on the sound effects. But very often editors are working with music as well. They're trying to find temp music at the time. And that
temp music, you mean just like temporary music, where they just either take a score you've written or somebody else's score, they just throw it up against pictures to kind of
anything. It could be anything from a score from a very similar film that they think has the right tone, to a song, or to music that they think is interesting. I mean, the most interesting temp score of all time was 2001, if you like. It was a temp score, and they did get a composer to write a score, but in the end, Kubrick didn't like it, so he went with the temp score. Famously, he didn't tell the composer, who turned up the premiere.
Oh my God!
So that's the coolest one. But you've got to admit that it's very interesting. It's very good music in that film, because the temp, it wasn't. They hadn't just taken the film music at all.
So have you found yourself? Have you showed up at premieres and been surprised by what you're hearing, like from your score, that they did that to it, or they've taken this? Does that happen to you?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, there's a few times when. Early on in my career, I used to go to the dub, and that proved to be quite dangerous because it's a difficult environment for composers to be in. You've just spent 12 weeks of your life kind of putting everything you can into the music, and everybody's been telling you that this is very important, that what you're doing, and to try and make every part of it correct. And then you get to the dub and you suddenly realize, oh yeah, I'm actually just part of this collaboration.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to this. So that's the place where your ego kind of just tries to exit either through your throat or through your arsehole. Your inner arsehole, I should say.
Metaphorical.
What's there? Is there any way of getting him back, do you think? I can't see you at the moment, so
I can see you and I can hear you.
Yeah.
And
all right, we're just trying to
by
figure
the way,
out how to get
this
you back.
is Holly Sedillos, who's also a friend, right over
Yes,
John's
if
shoulder.
anybody's wondering
Fantastic
why I'm called
singer.
Holly Sedillos.
It doesn't show up.
Oh, it doesn't show up? Oh, okay, we've shared that, right. Yeah.
I don't know.
She's technical advisor at the moment.
Nice.
And my partner. So
Yeah. So anyway, can you see?
Sorry, we keep getting we keep getting spam calls. So I'd just like to take this moment to say to Verizon and to AT&T, fuck you all, because how can you not in these days stop this? I mean, really, it's like, I'm not surprised we've got COVID-19 if they can't stop spam calls. Anyway, where were we? We were talking.
So talking about the dub stage, so that
the dub stage, a terrible place for composers to be. So I then went to another principle, which is have a trusted sort of music editor there who would deal with it all, because I shouldn't be there, and that works very well. But then occasionally you don't have your sort of trusted music editor. You might have another music editor there who's perhaps good, but is not really there just to sort of keep you completely informed, and is maybe more concerned about the editor and the director's thoughts on this. And then so you're not really sure what's going on, and then you turn up to the final premiere and things have changed and you didn't realize, and it's a little bit of a shock, and it makes it hard to watch the film. But to tell you the truth, once I've scored a film, I'll never be able to watch it again, because the process is still burnt into the film for me, and the process will then make me pop out of just watching the story.
Really? So even if you're just clicking around on cable at night and one of your movies comes up, you won't sit and spend 10 minutes with it and say, oh yeah, I remember this, or that's...
I will. Sometimes you see it, but it's normally, I think there's a minimum of 10 years before I can do that.
Wow.
And after 10 years, then it gets to the point at which it's interesting. Sorry, we've got one of the dogs is barking in the background. I don't know if anyone is hearing that. I'm up in the kitchen at the moment. This is chaos. So 10 minutes, so 10 years, maybe let's call it the 10-year, 10-minute rule. After 10 years, you can watch up to 10 minutes of your own film without it hurting.
Wow. Okay, so then even like, you and I have had this conversation before. When I compose music, it's painfully, like torturously slow. I agonize and agonize. I remember there's a writer's quote, I can't remember who said it, but that I spent the morning putting in a comma and the afternoon taking it back out. And that always often feels like my writing process. And then watching the speed, the velocity with which you not only compose music, but produce music, because I think maybe people who don't know that much about film scoring don't realize that these days you generally have a really solid mock-up for the director to listen to, right? So if you're writing orchestral music, you're able to just also push play and have with MIDI and samples, have a really convincing orchestral version playback before you even record with the orchestra, just so that everybody is on the same page. I honestly don't understand how it's physically possible. I mean, how many minutes of music a day? Are you thinking that? Or are you in the middle of it and thinking, if I don't do 2 minutes of music a day, I'll never make this? Is it?
That is a common technique that most composers use, which is, okay, I've got to write 90 minutes of music, thus I have X number of days, 90 divided by X equals each day I need to do it. I've lost the ability to be able to do that. Now I go between sort of +10 and -4. So I could throw away 4 minutes of music in a day, or I could write 10 minutes in a day.
Huh.
But most of the time it hovers around the minus 10 seconds of music to plus a minute. But it can be increased or decreased depending on sort of my anxiety level and where we are in the process, and it also it goes up and down depending on when meetings are. So
Oh, sure.
I can write a lot of music just before a meeting, and then the days after the meeting I can write nothing, and then in the days just up to the next meeting then I write more. So it ebbs and flows really, and I have help, so I can sketch things roughly, or I can say things. I can say, well, what if we try this theme here, and I back to my system and go and try things, or Anthony Willis, who helps me, Paul Mounsey helps me, and they can go and try things, and then I can dislike them and realize that that's definitely not the way to do it, or a bit of it will be very successful, and then we'll sort of really kind of figure out how to do it. The other way to do it is to look at the temp. You can look at the temp, and very often now the temp is a perfectly good score. There's nothing really wrong with it. And in fact, if you go and watch Hollywood films and TV shows, a good percentage of the scores you're listening to are basically just aping the temp. And there's nothing really wrong with that, because it works absolutely fine. And given the deadlines that we will have to go through, that means that sometimes it's the most effective way of making everybody happy, is just to make it sound pretty much like the temp. But there's this problem, I think, which is that it can get to that point where you don't really hear very interesting music a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's all in an echo chamber. Right?
Yeah, but that, in a way, that doesn't matter, because that's not really, often that's not what it's there about. It's about being the right tone for the right moment in the story, and so you can make it exactly that, and nobody will ever be wiser as to whether or not it's a terribly original piece or not. It doesn't really matter.
But does it matter to you? For, like when I'm writing concert music, which obviously has just a totally different time scale. But I know that if I got a general idea on day one, right, and then I wake up the next day and nope, and then nope, and I just kind of keep refining an idea, and sometimes I can spend weeks on a very simple idea. It seems like with the process you're talking about, just with the time constraint, that almost immediately, it's like Hans has said, that why go with your fifth bad idea when you can go with your first bad idea? That sort of, you wake up in the morning, it's like, that's the idea I got this morning, that's what I'm going to war with. Do you feel like that? It's like, that's it. I'm not agonizing anymore about this. That's the tune. Here I go.
Well, it is absolutely the way to do it, just depending on how much time you've got, really. So I've gone with tunes that have been written 10 minutes before the director walks through the door, because I needed the tune and he was about to come through the door, and he traveled a long distance to get here, had other things to redoing, and I didn't have a good tune for him. So the last 10 minutes before he walked through the door, I really, really focused.
Yeah, nothing focuses the mind like a deadline, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's for me too. I know that if I have a deadline, that's all the decisions come with the deadline in mind, right? At some point, it's like, I'm simply not going to finish unless I start making decisions.
Yes, and it's true. So it's a mixture of sandbox. It's play time. You play around, you try things, you look at things, you have fun. Yeah, you can have 5 ideas, and maybe the first one was good. If you've got time for 5 ideas, if you only got time for 1 idea, then that's the one. But it's hormonal, really, because it's about your anxiety and the level of
Yes.
the level of self-made drugs that are kind of making you focus, and that anxiety gives you excitement. Let's say excitement. I think it's a better way than anxiety. Sometimes I'm aware that I'm cooking well, I'm working well, because I'm kind of excited, because we're running out of time and this really has to be done, and you're just rolling forward, and there's that excitement that makes you kind of keep producing. But then there's other times when you do get bogged down in the decision-making process, because there's so many ways of doing it, really. Again, which is why it's easy to fall back on the temp and go, okay, well, that's a fine enough way to do it. I'll just do it like that.
We were watching the other night, Laurence and I were watching, I think the second or third Harry Potter film. Second, because it was a John Williams score, or maybe he did 3 too. Anyway, it was one of them. And, you know, it's just theme after memorable theme. It's ludicrous, right? It's like, okay, there's 5 iconic melodies. And I always thought, you've been in this situation often where it's like, okay, here comes this unbelievably beloved property, right? Either a book or a film in a series. The pressure is so huge to deliver, right? So it's not only that the melody or that motive, that musical motive, has to satisfy all these story elements, but also it just has to be like this. You know, it has to hit in the heart. And I've often wondered, like, for instance, with you, do you have melodies in your pocket? Do you have tunes that you're working on a film and you stumble on something and say, nope, that doesn't work at all for this, but I'm going to save that for 5 films from now when I really need that moment?
I just need to talk to my lawyer before I answer that question.
Is it an actual legal?
Everything is always composed original for the film, and nothing is ever left over.
Is that an actual legal concern? Like, if you had written it for a film and then maybe it got cut, or you shared a version of it and it got changed, then to use it later on, there's an argument to be made that the studio that made the film you were originally working on owns that idea?
All right, so the way that I certainly have been told it, and I read my contracts with the studio, is that if I now was on a film for, say, Paramount, and I had a really good idea for a vaccine for COVID-19, it would be Paramount's vaccine.
Because they basically own every idea out of your head during that time?
Yes, that's why my son wasn't born until after I'd finished Shrek. We kept him in there, otherwise he would now be property of Universal Pictures.
Okay, so you and I have also talked about this, but I really want to explore this for a minute, not with your son, but so I think, like, sometimes I think of myself as so sensitive. I'm such a delicate wallflower when it comes to my process and what the music means to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I live and die by every note. And even the idea that somebody might own something, or that there's this, do you know what I mean? There's this push and pull between the music and the art, but somehow you are able to navigate it. Like, you're able to, because I really consider what you do high art. Yeah, I know you wouldn't, but
any of these things, they're pragmatic art. I think that's what I call it, a pragmatic art. I mean, it's very sweet of you to say all of that, but the reality of it is you go between, yes, trying to sort of find inside yourself something that, will move people the way you feel that the story requires at that moment. And to do that, you look at your own life and you try and find things that will emote you in a powerful way, so that you can produce something powerful that you can say then what you, in musical terms, are trying to be able to say whenever you're just a composer who's writing music. The thing for film is that you then have to apply a prism of, okay, I'm going to write something from my heart that means something. The exact meaning of that in musical terms is around this area, and it's not specific. If you left it just as a musical statement, the great thing about music is that people would be able to interpret it any way they wanted, and they could see it. In this particular case, we're going to give it a more specific interpretation, which, when put against picture, it does have this kind of, extra sort of meaning between the story and the music, now that those two things add up to become this other thing. But you then have to say, okay, well, it's also my job to manipulate that music, so I can do something I feel is saying exactly what it needs to be said. And it's very, very meaningful to me and the director walks in and goes, no, that I don't get anything from that. So you either have to change it, or you have to work out what it is that's not touching him about it. You know, your association with it, how you found that piece of music deep inside you, is not in his head, and it's not in the audience's head. So now it's just about how it is in real life to other people who are coldly indifferent to it. If they're watching a story, then they are not indifferent to the music. But they're they should be very concerned by the character, because they're looking into this character and they're seeing themselves, they're seeing their own lives. And then, lo and behold, comes this music. It must support the same. It must get a reaction from them that is the same as their feelings about that scene. If it's out of place to their reaction, to the general audience's reaction to the story at that moment, then you're pushing them away from the story, and that could be something that the director needs you to do. So a sad moment in a film, it's very important not to always write sad music for sad moments. I think you can tell a lot of extra levels of story by cooling the sadness, or making a little bit more intrigue, or just being more neutral, or having a movement in it, or having some rhythmic movement in it that tells you, yes, this is a sad moment, but the pulse of this music is going to tell you it's not simply a sad moment. It's actually a moment that's going to help this story move forward. So there's lots of ways you're reacting against, to, with, and away from what the audience should be feeling at that point in the storytelling arc. I mean, and we've all seen ones that have worked so well they become iconic.
Including yours.
Well, a few I've managed to get away with that have become iconic because the film has worked so well. You know, I'm not that keen on the piece of music that's in The Forbidden Friendship in How to Train Your Dragon, but the scene is so wonderful that the music kind of got to, jump on the back of that, really. So people remember the music as being they remember the music very, very fondly because the scene is so good.
I disagree with you.
Fuck you.
Yeah, which is exactly the reason you're not in a position to see it.
She disagrees with me as well.
So. Yeah, right. There is, like, for instance, people love that music independent of the scene. I know we do. We listen to it on car rides. It's like
yeah. But if you haven't seen the scene in the first place, trust me, or you'd be like, nah.
No. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Got an audience.
Laurence is now handing me stuff too. This is a good question. I want to ask about this in a minute. But yeah, so I feel like I disagree with that as well, John. That it's not that the scene imprinted on me. It's that the music it's one of the things that I think you do unbelievably well is you distill an emotion, and it's not just a one-dimensional emotion, right? Like you said, so it's not just, okay, it's this moment in How to Train Your Dragon, so it's got to be exciting, or it's got to be tender, or it's not one-dimensional like that. It's got a lot of depth. There's a lot of emotional colors happening in there. And I think that transcends the really good music. The one thing that I think is challenging, I really wanted to ask you about this, in terms of being a film composer, is that the music itself has a very defined structure, right? So let's say you're going to write a cue that has this melody and does this kind of thing. It's not like you can, like when we write concert music, where you can give it a proper intro, you can set up a theme, you can develop the theme, you can give it a proper outro. It's like, no, you've got 1 minute and 31 seconds. And within that 1 minute and 31 seconds, you have to hit this emotional beat, you have to hit this emotional beat, and this. So it must be liberating in some ways that the structure is so defined, but it also must be challenging to build a piece of music, if you know what I mean, that's coherent on its own.
Yeah. I mean, given that this is a public forum, I can tell you stock answer, or I can tell you the sad truth.
No, tell me the sad
What do
truth.
you
I
want?
really want to
What do you
hear
want?
this. Yeah, no, tell me the sad truth.
The sad truth is, from my perspective, and I'm sure that there are most of the other composers who are, in Hollywood, have much more of a kind of a real, have this clamped down. It's luck with me. I just fiddle around until it sort of works. The very first thing I ever did in Hollywood, believe it or not, was for Terrence Malick. He was producing a film called Endurance, and Hans was doing Endurance with him, and then was going to do Thin Red Line with him. And so Hans was busy, and I was there, and I helped Hans out and ended up scoring the film. And Terrence Malick was, didn't know me from Adam and treated me like an artist. And one of the things he always said was, that's, right, you'd play a piece of music for him and he'd look at it and he goes, that's fantastic, that's fantastic. Can we just move it like 15 seconds? just move it. So which way? Doesn't matter.
Say, just move it around somehow.
Just move it later, move it earlier by a substantial amount. It's like, I made this fit very specifically, and I'm now going to move it by this way. And you'd be amazed how many of the cues that you all may love that fit a very, very precise way were written in a different place. And then I just moved them, and they work better because I didn't get too much into the trying to get the music to follow the scene. Sometimes I just was absorbing the scene, maybe, and the music was kind of going its own way a bit too much. And it ended up as a good piece of music, but wasn't quite right for the scene. So I would then shift it along by 20 seconds, and oh yes, that's much better in this part of the scene. And then I'd fill in the gap that I now had. So
it's really interesting.
Not much of an art there, is there?
No, but actually, I would say the opposite. It's almost like, Terrence Malick, what a legend, right? So it's almost like he is treating you the way he might treat an actor, right? Where he's you're playing the scene one way, and then he's just gently trying to get you to be not so prescriptive, right? It's like, okay, you think this is what it is. So yeah, like you said, you write this and you're going to get this essence of this thing. Now let's just move it. And then suddenly it becomes magical. That sounds like interesting directing to me.
Yes, very. And I've always tried to sort of hope that the directors that got the best out of me, I've always been the ones that sort of inspire me. They don't have, utter sort of devotional faith in me. They don't have, they don't just go with whatever I think is good. And they're not obviously the ones that are kind of, dogmatically assholes are difficult to work with as well. But the ones that just sort of inspire you are and look to inspire you. And I've sometimes said, you should treat me like an actor because I'm a bit delicate and I'm a bit egotistical. And but if you turn me around, if you get me in the right place, I'll probably be able to get something good. I may not know it's good at the time, and I may not know how to. I may still need manipulating into the picture in the right way. It may need editing. And to tell you the truth, that's how I write. I do that as myself. To write, I just play a lot. And I capture everything in MIDI. And then I listen through, what seems like hours and hours of absolute rubbish. And I go and I have a pair of scissors in the software, and I just kind of listen with one ear to it in the background, and when I hear something that just catches my attention, I then just go and snip that a little bit and then color it differently. There may be hours of that stuff, and so there'll be sessions where there's 2 hours of terrible piano playing, and then out of those 2 hours there'll be 12 seconds of little snips that have been colored differently, and I'll go back and I'll look at that, and then I'll move that around, and then I'll start to edit that, and we'll develop on that, and that's where themes come from. So the vagary around music is, you're digging it out of nowhere, and let's put the nowhere aside for the minute, and I'll come back to the nowhere. You're digging it out of nowhere, and then when you get something good, then a lot of the compositional process is to try and organize it. And whether that's just for writing music or whether it's writing music for films, it's the same. The nowhere is important to know that it's everything I ever heard in my life.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
music I've ever heard in my life. And that's basically just a giant pot that I sort of spoon into in my subconscious, pull out things that I always love every time I hear them, and then hopefully forget well enough for it to become a sort of a nice mishmash of something else and becomes its own flavor.
Yeah, weirdly combine things or misremember things, right? And then it becomes sorry. But so then when you're doing that, when you're in that process and you're writing, I have my own thing which I call the golden brick. I don't know if you and I ever talked about this, but
are you talking about that large cache of gold that you keep in your apartment?
Yeah, that one. It's these days it's I call it more of a golden pebble, but thanks for asking. So the golden brick for me is exactly what you're talking about. It's like somewhere out of this sea of improvisation or just humming to myself, I find a chord or a couple of chords or a couple of notes that are, it's how you said it. It's like, boom, that's it. That's something special. For me, it's always, I imagine that this golden brick has all of the DNA to create the rest of the piece. It's in there, it's kind of bubbling. And even more like in a narrative idea, like within a movie, I would imagine it's, like say it's even just two chords, you know, like if you, I don't know, can you hear this? Like,
yep.
Like Debussy always uses, you know, this, right? This 1/5 thing. And it always just sounds like the C to me. I don't know if it's because it started in La Mer and then everybody just used the C. But let's say, for instance, just those two chords are enough to know that's a window into this other world. I have to build this whole thing, but that's my way in. So is it the same for you that you, when you find those few moments, you know, it's not just this is a starting point. It's like this is actually bubbling with a whole bunch of stuff that will end up making this new thing.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, if you're a proper composer, you can take, you know, it'd be like stand up and, you know, like improvisation comedy, you know, where you ask the audience for 2 notes. Give me 2 notes.
Yeah.
You know, and once you can in theory take that and you should be able to develop that into anything you want. I mean, the theme and variations, I always remember loving the Tchaikovsky Rococo for cello. What's it called? It's like theme and variations, and then there's the Rachmaninoff, which is always the incredible one, where it's like you get to the movement, the famous movement, and you go, how is that a variation?
Yeah, right.
20 years later, then I discovered, oh, it's retrograde. So it's like, how did he get to that? That's incredible. So you can go and search in anything. Really, you shouldn't need, I mean, part of me says I shouldn't need to be even looking. I should be able to just like slam my cock down on the keyboard and it'll be enough to make something. That's fine. And, you know, I must admit that certainly a lot of film music sounds like people.
But wait, I want to disagree with you here because I actually think yeah, I think it's not the definition of a good composer that can just take anything and make it work. Like one of the things that I think Bach did so brilliantly is that, you know, if he's got like the little, right, this, it's not just a collection of notes. It's that Bach intuitively knows that little tune is full of the rest of the fugue. It's not like he could just take, you know, and then, I mean, Bach probably could make something work, but it's like that little golden brick that I'm talking about, or that little motive that you respond to. It's actually better than just random notes, right? Or do you not feel that way? Do you feel like?
No, I probably was being incomplete with my cock metaphor. So what it is you get. So let's say you just take the fourth, you know. So you take the fourth and going back. So all right, so you got that. Then once you have that, then as a composer you have to say, okay, that's. And your golden brick things, maybe I think of it maybe as a golden. A brick is too big for me because. No, not a golden. Golden Cock. Actually, Golden Cocker is a great piece of music by Rimsky-Korsakov, I think.
Yeah, 80s.
But no, it's just that, and maybe this is what you're describing, because you're describing it as a brick, which is there's a bunch of other bricks that need to go around it.
Absolutely.
Right. So I see. And in that case, yes, I agree with you completely.
But ideally, but they're all built.
I find the golden brick is too heavy for the cock. So it hurts too much. So I just need something a little smaller, and then I can put all the bits around it. How did we get here?
I don't know. This reminds me of every conversation we've ever had. So, yeah. Okay. So then I want to talk about something related to this, which is now with, I don't know, what have you done? 55, 60 scores probably?
Maybe 60 now. I think.
Yes, it's just this astonishing body of work. And I would think now that in a room full of people, including editors, including the directors themselves, you probably have as much or more experience with actual storytelling than anybody on the team, with the nuts and bolts of just watching what works. That here are the characters, here's what they want, here's what the obstacle is, here's how they get it. And I wonder if during the process, if you're, I guess it's probably different with each director, but are you given the chance to chime in on story, even in the process? Not saying here's what the music needs, but actually like, I'm confused about this, or the motivation you think you're trying to make actually isn't what I'm seeing on screen. And what if you were to move this here, or what if this, is that part of your remit when you're working?
It is and it isn't. If it's anything, it's that they do want you to have your own sense of what the story is, and be able to sort of help pick it out, help tease it out of the material at the time with music, obviously. It's best not to go in and give story notes to the director.
Yeah.
I've done that a few times, sort of when I asked, which is basically a trap that I walk straight into. And then a few times I did it later on in my career, and it worked well, because it was a director who was very, very secure. The ones who are secure are like, they'll take an idea from anyone at all, and so
just for a good idea.
Yeah, but and I certainly have a difference of opinion sometimes about how the film should be made, which is why starting with a script is dangerous. I have done that in the past, where I've looked at the script and I've gone, oh, I totally know how this film's going to go, and I write a bunch of music to the script, and then the film turns up and it's not that at all. And that all that music is now never going to work at all. So I try not to have too much of I try and be the audience member. This is what I tell everyone, is that I try and watch the film the first time. So I say to everybody on the teams, like, that first time I watch your film will be very important. If you get your film to a place where you think it is, what it should be, is close enough, then let me watch it then. Let's wait until then, because that first time I watch it, and when I watch it without music, will be the time I'm impregnated with that story. I will react honestly, and I will always remember that the way the story flowed into me, in a way that I will never be able to have again, because I'm now sort of tarnished with, from there onwards, if you ask me, I will only ever really be able to, honestly and truthfully, my heart will only ever be able to remember the first time I saw it. I can then move away or towards things from that position, but that first time through is the most important sort of clean heart I have for the project. And so watching it the first time without music, I take it in as a story. I hear music in my head while I'm watching it. Because
Do you really?
Not listening to the temp, yeah, or the feeling of music, or the, I don't know. It's not even notes. I never hear notes. God, no, I don't hear notes. I wish I did. Nothing. It's like squeezing very old toothpaste for me, getting anything out. So at that particular time, but I have oral feelings, shall we say, about what's happening in the film, and that will then instruct me as to, as I come to a scene to score it, I can remember how I felt about that character in that part of the story, and I just want it to fly there, or I want it to be heartbreaking, or I want it to be, exhilarating, and those are the strength of my reaction emotionally is going to help me write, I think, music that has hopefully the same emotional response that the audience member comes to when the film is finished.
Okay, so I want to talk now about your concert work, which is, okay, so this is, first, it's amazingly well written. I mean, just beautifully well written and original, and this other voice that I feel like you rarely get to do in your films. And also, just as a composer, I'm also amazed that with the volume of music that you are required to write for the film scores that you're writing every year, that as your hobby or this other thing that you do, you're also writing like the Requiem, which is this massive work. Do you find them completely different disciplines? Do you write the concert work? Did you want to be a concert composer and you're writing film? Does it keep your brain alive writing concert work in a different way that writing film music does? Do they cross-pollinate ideas for each other?
See, going backwards.
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot of it.
Yes, they do. I think it probably, writing a big choral work improved my choral writing in film. Do I try and keep my brain alive? I have no desire to do anything other than sit on the couch and eat chips and watch something. But then there's this part of me that feels that is a waste of my life, and I really should try and be more responsible with this, the sort of the gift of the impossible life I have. The rarity of time and space coming together to be the moment that I could have consciousness, and the rest of my life spent with such joy and beauty, and yes, pain and sorrow and everything everybody else experiences, but the delicate the delicate moment that I have of consciousness, there's moments I need to rest, but then at a certain point I eventually feel this is a waste of what I've got. So I was then trying to write things, and I vacillate between trying to do them and doing them, and often again it was like the conductor Jose Cerebria. He's this wonderful older gentleman who sort of forced me to a place where I had to get it done and finished, and that needing somebody like that it's something sad for me. I'm not terribly well self-motivated that way, but
I'm the same way, by the way. I wouldn't write it.
It's terribly useful, isn't
it? Yeah, if they weren't selling tickets to the concert where the piece is going to be premiered, I wouldn't write a note. I always say that that I have to get to a place where the pain of not finishing is greater than the pain of starting.
Yes, but the feeling at the end of doing it is good, obviously, and all I'm trying to do, I suppose, and the fact I try to be a composer, yes, but that was just because I liked making music. I loved making music. I loved this playing in this language that was so beyond any other language I'd ever experienced. The profound effect of music on me made me want to pursue it. Pursuing it is hard. It's very hard. Playing is really hard, and I just couldn't do it. So I kind of, as a side bet, I went into sort of organizing it for other people, as it were. And I could have organized. You
started as a violist, right?
A violinist. First instrument was trombone. Believe it or not, when I was very young, like 5, I had a sopranino trombone that the first trombone of the Royal Philharmonic gave me, a beautiful little silver one. And I played that a bit, but my father who was a tuba player, used to say, don't do vibrato like that, with the right hand. Don't do it. You sound like Don Lusher. I actually like Don. I love Don Lusher's playing. So, but there was that whole thing, the classical thing about being able to do vibrato. And then I heard a violin piece and loved that, and I picked up the violin, and that seemed to be easier than the trombone. And then that went, and then I realized, I'm never going to do that. So that's much too hard. So then I became a viola player, because you can kind of still make music with it, but you literally don't. I didn't need to practice as much. People would put up with me being a worse player than if I'd been in the violins. And actually, it turned out to be very useful, because being right in the center of the orchestra, right under the conductor, you get a better balance of orchestration. So I spent a lot of my sort of teenage years and very formative years in a viola section, kind of playing the viola, but sort of ignoring it, and just hearing how it all fitted in with everything else that was going around me. And probably a lot of orchestral ideas came from just those experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Were you writing at the time? Had you written for the viola or for the strings or anything?
I was trying to write by the time I got to 16, 17. And then I decided, I definitely don't want to go into music. I want to go to music college, but I never get in on the viola or violin. And I changed over to composition, and I got lucky. I went for four interviews: Royal College, Royal Academy, Guildhall, and Trinity College of Music at the time. And Trinity College of Music was very kind, and they let me in. As the Royal College gave me a written exam at the beginning of it, and one of the things was, here's the first two bars of a Beethoven string quartet. Continue in the style of Beethoven. And I asked if they had a piano I could sit at to work it out. And the gentleman said, if you need a piano, this is not the right college for you.
Oh, jeez.
And he was right.
Do you think he's right? I mean, really?
Yes, for that kind of thing, it just wasn't in my head. It's not how I'm able to sort of process things. I process them in such a bleak way that I'm lucky. I mean, I would not be a composer were it not for the invention of the microchip. I'm a disabled composer who requires, I require help from technology, and it's great, and I do use it, and I use it as vivaciously as I can, because it's incredible, the technology now.
I don't think it's helped, though. My God, I mean, every great composer was a keyboardist and wrote a lot of music at the keyboard. And I would hardly say it's a crutch, I think that idea of a composer just sitting, idyllically out in nature and writing down, I think that's a pretty rare animal. Mozart, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I always used to sort of laugh and think of, Stravinsky always required, he always wanted a piano, so he would sit at this upright piano, apparently. Can you imagine writing Petrushka, and he's banging away writing Petrushka, and Bach walks in the room and goes, "What's wrong with you?" So that always gave me a feeling of, okay, all right, let's just, we'll move on and just assume that I'm fine. And but I use computers, so it wasn't the right place for me. Trinity was fabulous for me because it wasn't because they accepted me. I mean, it was that they maybe saw something in me that was a little more off the wall than I was ever going to sort of get to show it somewhere that I was academically challenged. So I had great teachers who challenged me in different ways. So the thing I learned at music college was how to be creative.
Really?
I didn't learn everything a composer should know, but I learned the most important thing in my life, which is how to be creative, how, when pushed, to find a way around, the issue of, how to express yourself in a timely manner, in a way that is practical, but is maybe looking for originality all the time.
Wow, I mean, that's the dream education, right? I love
it. Basically, I hung out in they had an electronic studio, and I hung out there overnight, every night, for 4 years. And then in the day, I would play with all the musicians who were willing to, play pieces and and I had, great teachers and great friends as well.
So when you're writing concert works now, do you draw on some of the stuff that you were learning even back then? Do you know what I mean? Like are you
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah, I
and
mean,
specifically, sorry. Well, no, go ahead. What were you going to say?
well, I mean, I think whatever I'm writing now, I'm drawing on every musical experience I've ever had in some way or other. Um,
Yeah, I was going to.
the problem with what I learned in college, and then what I learned doing jingles, and then what I learned doing TV, and then what I learned doing, an opera, which Gavin Greenaway and I wrote with Michael Petrie in '94. It's all sort of a line of things that lead you to believe you can do something. uh, it's it gives you, I think, the pleasure of working on these things and getting them eventually done, and them sort of being not utter shit and being okay, leads you to believe, well, I guess I should keep going, because in theory, I could probably figure this out better next time. You build yourself a future route towards something, because you don't immediately dismiss everything that you've done. And as long as that sort of little vote of optimism is always there, then you're always building. I couldn't have come to Hollywood had I not done the opera, of all things, because I remember doing the opera and thinking, well, because I was frightened of coming to Hollywood. I'd met Hans the year before that, and he'd said, we've got a lot of work on. You should come over. So it was about a year before I did, and in that year I did the opera. And at the end of the opera, I thought, this was a lot of work. If I can handle this, I could probably manage it. So maybe I will go to America. Then I went to America a year later, and I walked in the door, and he went, "Who the fuck are you?"
Was that literally you came over like, well, Hans has invited me, and then, hey, Hans,
Also,
remember?
yes, absolutely. And he was like, oh, yeah, sure, yeah. Well, nothing at the moment, I'm afraid. Nothing at the moment. And then you realize, oh, have I made a big mistake?
So one of the concert pieces that you wrote was this Requiem Addendum, this beautiful, hauntingly gorgeous a cappella choral work. And I had the great privilege of conducting the premiere with BBC Singers. This was 3 years ago, maybe?
Yeah.
Just about 3 years ago, I think. And one of the things that struck me so deeply about it was you also wrote the poetry. And you had that translated in English, but the poem is so beautiful. I mean, the music's amazing as well, but did you write the poem first and then set it to music?
Yeah, well, the words were kind of written as a reaction to sort of a rather a very difficult and tragic moment in my life, and I don't normally write, but I guess it's one of those things that it just they came and I wrote them down, and then they were there on my phone in the notes things, and so then when you asked me to write a piece, I thought, well, maybe I could use that, or is that too raw, or is it too soon? And our mutual friend, Tony, translated it for me into Latin so that I could hide behind it, rather, because I didn't think I could set the words in English. I think it would have felt too, I don't know, like hammering, screws into, something that was too fragile. So I needed a way of being able to ignore the words as I set them. And then as I was, this is the chaos of composing, is that, so you have a terrible life event, you write something, then you figure out how to turn that into something else because somebody else asked you to write something, right? So now my obligation to you was get a piece written. And I thought, well, that could be fertile ground to work on. And then I started to write, and then I didn't like what I'd written, and I wrote something else, and then I didn't like that either. And I was running out of time. So then I looked at the words again, and I looked at the two things I'd written, and I thought, well, what if I just do them simultaneously? And then, because what I saw, I think, in the piece maybe was a way of expressing the relationship between people. In my case, I'd lived with somebody for a long time and had a very long relationship, and that is an interesting thing to do. It's a really intriguing thing to look back on and look forward to as well, as to how you live with somebody, in this case, a man and a woman. So I just decided to then make the piece a conversation between a man and a woman. And so the men are singing the male part and the women are singing the women's part. And they sometimes overlap and they sometimes cross and they sometimes harmonize and they sometimes don't. And in that particular case, it ends up with just the men. So...
Yeah, it's such a beautiful piece. And do you write other poetry?
No. I mean, I think I write things when they come to me. They're never poetry, and I certainly wouldn't describe that as poetry. It wasn't constructed that way. The words were just kind of raw out of the brain. I always think that if I write poetry, I will search for words and I will not find them, and then I will try and write music to say that, because that for me is easier than finding the right selection of words that give you that when great poetry gives you so much more than just what you're hearing, the words you're hearing. It gives you a rhythm, and it gives you a forwards and a backwards and an up and a down imagery that is so 4D. Poetry, when read, and when read in your head as you read it through on the paper, it's temporal. It's like music. It has that experiential start to the end, and you see life form within it, and that's what I think all of these temporal arts are so important to us, because if you just see a still image. I was thinking about this the other day. If I have a problem with art, it's because it's not temporal, but actually I realized I wasn't looking correctly. I think when you look at a piece of art that's really amazing, it's because you look at it in different ways at different times in your life, or even just that at that moment you're able to look around the picture and see different things and discover the story within it. And maybe I'd been too immature to look at art that way before. I mean, I always liked the art I always liked tended to be installation art, because it is more, you walk around it and you experience it in a more temporal way. So poetry, nah, too hard. So I just jumped straight over that into music, because it's sort of it's my attempt at making poetry, but just then I don't have to be specific about words.
Laurence handed me this question a little bit, which is, so it's basically when you were recording How to Train Your Dragon 3, and you had me come over, I conducted the choir bits on it, which were just phenomenal choral writing, just unbelievable. I remember it was my group there, and everybody afterwards saying, "Oh God, why can't all film scores be written like this?" It was a joy to sing and to work on. But at the end of it, you'll remember, so you're in Abbey Road, and the last thing on the last day, if I've got the time right, was you sat down at the piano and you played that kind of farewell theme alone. Was it on the last day? Yeah, and
literally the last thing. Yeah.
So hauntingly beautiful just to watch you do that, and to kind of say goodbye to that character and say goodbye to the movies, I suppose, in a way. I found it so touching. And what was it? How did it feel playing that?
Again, coming from the pragmatic art of writing for cinema, I was both struck with the luck of being able to it was sort of by design, leave that little bit, which was a theme that had come from Dragons 2, which was lost and found, and seemed right for the moment of separation between the two main characters. And it seemed good for me to be separating from the characters myself. So it was all it was nicely packaged into a sort of perfect symbolism. And yet I sat there and couldn't play chords where all the notes went down at the same time, and it drove me nuts. And I realized terrible pianist I was, and this was really simple stuff. But it was kind of a joyful moment actually to be able to, despite to get through, to ignore my crappy piano playing, to just know that I was able to sort of put the finishing touches to it in a kind of a neat way that I would always remember. That was very it was a pleasurable moment in a somewhat, with a little bitter sadness to it, but a very satisfying moment.
Yeah, I felt that Laurence was there in London, you'll recall, and so we were. Actually, I think you even cleared the control booth, so we got to see the beginning of it, and then basically you just had all of the studio to yourself, right? And they just I think maybe somebody's in there, but basically just let this run, and we were all sitting in the canteen waiting for you to basically finish and then come out. And at the time I was speaking to the How to Train Your Dragon author, the woman who wrote the original books.
Cressida.
Yeah, Cressida, exactly. That's a thrill as well. And I remember we were all just in there, and there was just this lovely atmosphere. And then you came in, and you had just this. It's such a beautiful look on your face, like really, like the completion of this massive work of art. I mean, my God, you must have written. It must be 5 hours worth of music over the 3 films, right? There's the dragon right there.
Yeah.
Anyway, truly amazing.
I was going to say, sorry. I was going to say, it could have been that, or I might have, before I got to the canteen, I may have gone to the toilet, and I might have been just had that look of beatific relief.
Beatific. The toilets at Abbey Road, second to none. So John, maybe just to finish up here, I asked people to write in questions. We got a zillion of them, but I just chose a couple that I really like. This is from Yash Kathroti, I think is how you say their name, and asking, as begin composers, we often start our compositions with thinking about melody and harmony. How would one be able to think beyond that and enter into the world of textural composition?
Well, my big bugbear is with how good and band arranging is. And arranging is a term that we kind of jump over. Who's an arranger? So you can take somebody else's song and you can do arrangement of it. You can be a big band arranger, you can be a choral arranger, this kind of stuff. Well, actually, arranging is a huge part of getting the music right. And you can arrange sound, and you can arrange imagery, and you can arrange words. So as a composer, your job is to arrange sound, and that is to get it to clearly shape, to have a clear shape. So when you're talking about texture, those textures are there for you to play with. Every texture goes from one single note played by one instrument to 1,000 notes played by the orchestra simultaneously. What is its purpose? Why is it there? And where is it going? Because it's temporal. So you're starting somewhere, you're ending somewhere, and you're going from A to B via a million dots in between. So it's so a note that happens means something. A note that changes means something different. And a note that changes from one place to another is more meaningful to the human experience because our lives change. So change is good in all music. So the question is, it's not just about texture, it's about texture A to texture B. So think more carefully, I think, about how you get from one thing to another. And are those two things clear enough? And then is the change clear enough? And did you manage the change properly? So it can be any sound you like, and that sound can be musical or not. It can be tonal or not. It can be discordant, but you can go from one kind of discord to another kind of discord. And if it's exactly the same type of discord, you have not gone anywhere. You have not changed. Nothing has changed. Now, if that's what you want to say, then fine. But if you do 90 minutes of atonal bollocks, which is basically what it is, when people, the great atonal composers, the great people who, George Crumb, wrote some extraordinarily amazing works that never stop changing. And I forget while I'm listening to them that they're completely atonal, or they have actually they're sonic. They're just sonic, but it doesn't matter. I'm hearing the story. I'm hearing everything, and then I can listen to just dreadful, highly intellectual atonal 12-tone, music, and it never changes, and nothing is being said, in my opinion. So. And the one I always say is arranging is everything. Look at the Police, not the Popos, but the actual band, the Police. 3 people, perfect arranging. Nobody there was going to give an inch of room on their part. And because there was 3 of them with 3 giant sort of brains and egos, they found the place in the song for each of them to be. Not because one of them was giving up space for the other, but because each one of them found the right thing to do in the interaction with the other thing. So you have to be an arranger of sound, and you have to value each part in it, and you have to care about each part as much as if you are the drummer in the Police, and as if you are the bass player in the Police, and if you are the guitarist in the Police, you care. So if you write your wind parts and then you forget them, you have to go back and go and look at it and go, okay, well, I'm now the second clarinetist. How do I feel about how badly arranged this piece of music is? Because what I'm playing is completely pointless. Now you've plastered me with 12 trumpets over top of this, isn't it? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? So I try and say arranging is the thought process to, once you're clear of writing melodies and harmony, then what is your arrangement doing? That was a long answer to that.
No, not at all. And so then related to that, Rachel Knott asks, do you have a favorite instrument to write for? Are there any that you give to certain elements in the score? And then she puts kind of like Eric and his alto lines. So for me, when I'm writing for choir, I just naturally give all of my favorite lines to the altos. Maybe not all of them, but most of them. And part of it's because it's not that I only like the alto sound. I like the alto aesthetic. And also I always feel like they're underused. I find when I'm writing for orchestra, I do the same thing with violas. I'd love to give the violas a special line because they're often just the filler. Do you know what I mean? And so something to anyway, do you have that? Do you have favorite instruments? When you're building these textures, when you're orchestrating?
There's little kind of, everything's a bunch of musical fetishes for me. So there could be a viola line in there that's important simply because I remember playing a viola line. And then there's things because I liked listening to Billy May arrangements on an album. So I particularly like the trumpets in those. And then there's bass, the use of basses in certain things. I mean, that's I always talk about young person's guide to the orchestra. I mean, basically that's everything you need to know about orchestration right there. But I find myself, I can say that, but then I find myself not being able to orchestrate as well as Britain still, and yet ripping off bits of that time and time again. But I stuff them into other things that they never quite work as well in. So I don't know. I mean, there's things that are always incredibly effective. And voices, I do love writing for voices because it's maybe it's because it's such a shortcut to emotion. I do love very carefully putting in bass parts because I remember reading the Henry Mancini book where, he would say, you can do an arrangement, do a chart for a big band, for a jazz ensemble, the one thing, and you can put chord symbols in and very kind of rough things for almost all the players, but never let the bass player do his own thing. Write every note for the bass player, which is very unfair because a lot of bass players I work with know they write better bass parts than I ever
Yeah,
will
yeah.
to the chords. But I remember thinking that's very important. I need to be very specific about bass parts and never let that kind of go. And then what are the other things? I mean, I love working with percussion for a variety of reasons, but you know, when you get a chance to really kind of create percussive sort of stories within music, you can say these amazing things. It can be these amazing conversations going on, I think, in the percussion.
Laurence, by the way, talks about this with your music all the time, that you sometimes approach orchestral writing like a percussion instrument. And it's such a fresh sound, and it's got this real drive and energy to it. Are you thinking that way, or are you thinking like how to, you know, or is it really just this sounds good, put this together, is it intuitive?
Yes, it's a mixture of both things, and because I do write a lot of the orchestral writing is done in samples. It kind of is a bit dependent on the quality of the samples and what they tend to sort of lead me towards. You know, there's certain things you can do with samples that work better than the real thing, and there's certain things you can't do with samples where if you were to write them, they just flow right out of the orchestra so easy, and it's such a kind of a joy when you hear it. But it's just such a fight to make it work in the samples that, you know, early on you give up. I mean, as the quality of samples are sort of developing, it's just a joy to be able to sort of write closer and closer, I think, to orchestral music. But perhaps part of that is that I will get less and less original because the samples were leading me to write things that weren't very orchestral or normal orchestral.
Or that the sound.
You know, it's a cheat, and it's a blessing, and it's a pain, and honestly it's an important part of the way that music is, I suppose, developing. And if people who are good write with samples, the players will figure out how to play it, and it will become the orchestral sound of today will change, as it has done always, because of sort of technology. I mean, if you can call the piano a technology, you know, if you're writing with ensemble and you've got a harpsichord, and then along comes the piano and it'll wipe out the whole ensemble with the piano, you need to write differently around it. You need to write differently for the different brass instruments that we're developing. You know, once somebody realized how to put a bigger flange on a sack butt, then you've got lower notes, and that changes into a bass trombone, and that's a totally different way of writing.
Yeah.
So technology changes music. Change is good.
Change is good. So Jay, we're almost at like 80 minutes now. So maybe I'm just thinking like any final thoughts. So we've got a lot of students I can see in the comments. So probably not only composers, but people who want to go into film composing, people who want to be professional musicians, probably educators. And
the educators are the ones that interest me, because teachers are the everything. They are absolutely everything to our society, and it always amuses me how badly teachers are treated. Just and right at the bottom of how badly their teachers are treated is music teachers are treated the worst.
Yep.
The worst.
Yeah.
And actually, I realized doing a concert last year with an orchestra that I'd been in from 14 to 20. Where I learnt so much in this orchestra, the East Sussex Youth Orchestra, with this amazing conductor called Colin Metters, and he was the ultimate teacher for me. And I realized, and the East Sussex County had paid for all of this stuff, and they had educated me, and they sent me to college, and they'd given me everything, and I hope I paid it back in huge amounts of taxes. They deserve every penny. And then I see that they're being cut. Everything's being cut. And I thought to myself, is there really how much should you budget for educating the soul of your civilization? So my hat's off to music educators.
Amen. John, it's so good to talk to you.
Pleasure.
It's good to see you too. I hate that because of the pandemic, you and I haven't seen each other in person in months.
Yeah. Well, you look kind of like, you always look dangerously fertile. So
well,
it's probably best I didn't come near you, because I'm older and I'm less, I'm less, I'm less vigorous perhaps than.
Are you kidding? You've got your tennis schedule alone makes me weep.
Yeah, actually, if it hadn't been, I have to tell you, if it hadn't been raining today, I would probably have been doing tennis at this moment. But
Yeah, I know it's the other day of rain in the year here in LA.
That's right.
But thanks, man. It's so good to talk to you.
Pleasure.
All right. John Powell, everyone. So that's it. John Powell, absolute legend, crazy funny guy, and just a brilliant, brilliant mind. I could talk to John all day long about art, about composition, just philosophy in general. Thank you, John, truly. And for all of you out there who are part of Virtual Choir 6, I want to remind you that today is Monday, the 18th. Friday, the 22nd, this coming Friday, is the deadline for submitting your videos. Right now, I think as of this morning, we've got something like 6,500 videos submitted from, I think, 97 or 98 different countries. That's extraordinary. Those numbers are staggering. That being said, there are now 37,000 people who have registered to learn the music and to upload a video. And if you're one of those people who has registered and hasn't yet submitted your video, I beg you to do it today or tomorrow, Wednesday at the absolute latest, because we're genuinely afraid we're going to crash the servers. And the challenge is there's no plan B. If the servers crash, then that's it. We can't submit videos later on in the weekend, because we've got to start immediately with the production of the virtual choir. So it would just be terrible for all of you not to be part of this. And to get your video in. I think we're making something so beautiful and delicate and special. I'd really love for all of you to be a part of it. So that's it. So go record. Thank you again, John Powell, and be well, everybody.